All right. Hello again, and welcome to another in-depth review. This is the show where I take RPG books and I give them an in-depth review. When I say in-depth review, I mean in-depth review. I'm going to talk about the things that I like, the things that I don't like, the things that I think they did well, the things that I think they can do better. And I tend to go chapter by chapter, sometimes page by page. So these are pretty intense. For those of you wondering exactly what this in-depth review is, and you obviously didn't look at the thumbnail or the title, we are going to be talking about the G.I. Joe role-playing game Cobra Codex Source. Now, if you do enjoy these or any of the other stuff I do on this channel, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon to turn notifications on. All those things are super, super important. Now, because, again, this is an in-depth review, and it does take quite a bit of time to do an in-depth review, I like to start off by just giving recommendations about whether or not I think people should buy it, because a lot of people don't want to sit through a 2-hour long video just to figure out if they want to buy an RPG source book. And when talking about potential customers for this book, I tend to separate them into 3 different groups. The first group is what I call players. Players are people that are going to be sitting at a table and primarily going to be playing just a single character. The next group is GMs, game masters. Those are people who are primarily going to be sitting at a table and primarily sitting in the game master position. They're not going to be playing a single character. They're going to be playing all the other characters and designing encounters and all that fun stuff. The third group is an often overlooked group that I call the Lorehounds. Lorehounds may never actually sit at a table to play a tabletop RPG, but they really enjoy the lore or the story of whatever franchise or subject matter of the TTRPG is. So each one of those groups has different things that they want and need, and therefore I'm going to have different recommendations for each one. So let's go ahead and answer that question. Moving on. The first group. Should players buy this book? So, G.I. Joe the Cobra Codex is a unique book in the idea that this is basically a guide used to play an evil campaign. And that's not something that most tabletop RPGs will allow you to do, or not really allow you to, but will create an entire book on giving you options to do that. If we look at D&D and the Dungeon Master's Guide, they actually do have a section of evil player characters where they're just basically example subclasses of characters, but they aren't actually meant for players. They're meant for the DM if they want to create a more complex if they want to create a more complex evil character for the players to interact with, either as a villain or as a side character or something like that, gave them options so that they could effectively create evil characters. It's not really pitched as something that the players are supposed to use, because the powers themselves are technically a little bit unbalanced compared to the PHB classes. And if you look at other RPGs, it's really not a common thing to go, hey, did you want to play the bad guys? Here's an entire book for you. So that being said, for players, because this has been a question that I've gotten on some of my in-depth reviews and on some of the other times that I've talked about Essence 20, it's the idea, well, what if I don't want to play the good guys? What if I want to play the bad guys? Because the Decepticons in Transformers are really well known, and a lot of people really like those characters. The same thing is true about Cobra, though I would say I think the Decepticons, until more recently, like within the past 15-ish years, the Decepticons were more three-dimensional characters than a lot of the Cobra baddies. I don't think they really started fleshing out Cobra baddies until the late 90s, early to 2000s in the comics and the things like that. If you look at the television shows, they were never fleshed out. They were just caricatures of this is the bad guy and you're supposed to stop him. That being said, playing an evil character is a remarkably difficult thing for most players to do, because most people don't understand how evil characters work. When I was acting, I played almost exclusively villains. I was a tall dude. I'd been shaving since I was a freshman in high school, and I have a deep voice. Those are all things that kind of scream bad guy in theater. And I played a couple of really fun ones. I got to play Bernardo in West Side Story. I got to play. Play Judd in Oklahoma. I got to play Javert in what's it called? Les Mis. And all of those are really, really interesting characters. But something that a lot of people don't realize, and this book has one thing that when I'm doing the in-depth review, I would talk about how there is one origin that it's either an origin or I think it's an influence. One or the other. There's one option here that I will not allow in any of my games unless I have a one-on-one conversation with the player and we build their character together. Because it's basically, I'm a bad guy that does bad things. And that's not how villains work. Poorly written villains will go, well, I'm a bad guy and I'm doing this because it's bad and bad people do bad things. That's not how real people work. The actual kind of psychology behind someone that does bad things is they tend to view themselves as the hero of their own story. And they do talk about that in here a fair amount. But they don't, I don't think they go quite into enough for players themselves. A lot of that kind of clarification comes in the GM chapter, which I think a lot of players would just skip over because it's designed, because they think it's only for GMs. But the idea of an evil character in general, if we look at the like D&D alignment grid where you have lawful good over here and chaotic evil down here. Evil does not mean I do bad things, because bad is subjective. And I've talked about this in other videos before. A spellcaster that shoots a fireball into an inn. Well, that's obviously an evil character. Well, the reason he's shooting the fireball into the inn is that it has been used by bad guys, and it's actually a front, and it's full of bad people. Oh, well, obviously he's a good guy. Well, that's what the player characters believe, but actually what this spellcaster is doing is all the bad guys have moved out of there and they've just filled it with explosives, and so the fireball is going to create this massive explosion that's going to take out half the town, including the good guys. Well, obviously it's a bad guy. How can the same action make someone a good guy and a bad guy and then a good guy and a bad guy all over again? It's because good and bad are subjective terms. Do I believe that there is, a overarching, these are good things and these are bad things? That's a philosophical question that we don't really need to talk about. And a lot of times what is good and what is bad is something that you decide after you have all of the information. You can decide, was that a good thing or was that a bad thing? Killing people is bad. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Well, this person is a murderer and killed 100,000 people. Well, killing him is good then, right? You have to understand everything. And as a character, you cannot use something like that to make your decisions, because you won't be able to make your decisions until after the decisions have been made and you've examined all the aspects around the decision. It doesn't work that way. So the better way, and this is technically how good villains are written, is a quote-unquote good character is selfless, which means they are always going to choose the option, or they're mostly going to choose the option that they feel is going to benefit the most people. An evil character is selfish. That character is mostly going to do what is best for them. And that actually gives you a massive amount of gray area to work with so that you can actually tell interesting stories. There are a lot of evil characters that do good things. The character of Han Solo in Star Wars actually fits in the first half of the of A New Hope. He actually fits, and actually throughout most of the original trilogy, he actually fits the idea of a chaotic evil character. Well, no, he's not chaotic evil. He's just amazing. What I mean by that is chaos means they're kind of opposed to rules in general. They're about personal freedoms. They're about breaking rules, breaking standards. Han Solo's a smuggler. He's a criminal. That's what he does. And he bucks authority and he fights with authority figures all the time. And he rubs people the wrong way. He's a very chaotic individual. Also, he's very self-motivated. You look at a lot of his dialogue, especially in the first probably 2/3 of A New Hope, and he's talking about, hey, I'm doing this for my payday. As soon as you guys pay me, I'm out of here. I don't care about your little rebellion. I care about getting money. And that shows up over and over again, even when you start looking into the expanded universe. And I'm not going to talk about the sequel trilogy. He has to kind of struggle with this selfish impulses for him to be able to be with Leia, to hang around with Luke, to be a part of the New Republic eventually, and even to be a part of the rebellion. He's constantly kind of arguing with this self-motivated. So he is a self-motivated character that is also very chaotic. He's a chaotic evil character. And a good example of a bad lawful good character is the idea of the operative from Serenity. He is a monster and he knows it, but he believes in the law above all. Whatever he is told to do by the government is what he does. He doesn't ask questions. He doesn't look into the morality of it or anything like that. He does what he is told, and he commits atrocities because he firmly believes that by killing small amounts of innocent people, he is going to make the galaxy a better place for everybody. That is a lawful evil villain, or a lawful good villain. So anyway, going back to players, one of the things I think this does really well is it does the first chapter where it's talking about Cobra and kind of giving you a background on it. It does mention that Cobra is a hyper manipulative group that preys on people's insecurities and on their misinformation and things like that. Things that they don't understand, they will capitalize on that. And so they actually go remarkably far into helping you to create actual real characters that would do the wrong thing. And giving them motivations that make sense. To give you some examples, like the influences. One of the influences is desperate. And it's really that. You have debts you can't pay off. You've made promises you can't figure out how to keep. All your plans are on borrowed time, but there isn't enough time to pull them off. If something doesn't go right for you soon, you don't know what you're going to do. This is an extremely common motivation to get into criminal activity. It's the reason why a lot of people that get out of prison tend to reoffend really often, because they're put in these unbelievably bad situations when they come out. No one will hire them. They're not their ability to find work and their ability to just kind of live their lives is extremely limited. And so it does that. And the same thing happens, like one of the primary predictors of a criminal lifestyle is being poor. It is remarkably common for those in lower income areas to have a much higher rate of being involved in some sort of criminal activity. And so the idea of one of your influences being desperate fits with the idea of these are the people that Cobra would prey on. They find people in bad situations already that already feel like there really isn't a way out, and they give them a way out. But in order to get out, you've got to do some stuff that maybe will be questionable. And then as you go and get deeper and deeper and deeper, the questionability of it kind of goes out of the window. You know you're the bad guy eventually, but you're so deep in and you've developed a connection with this group. They helped you when other people wouldn't. That's a really, really powerful motivator. And you see examples of that over and over and over. Again, we'll go more into it when I do the in-depth part. But for players, like, this is actually a fairly decent. It's one of the best books I have seen on kind of explaining how to run an evil aligned character. So in that aspect, in and of itself, it's a recommendation from me. However, this is also additional character options. And the character options in here are very interesting. Not only do they give you like, I think it's like 2 more focuses or foci for each of the roles. So basically 2 more subclasses for each of the roles. I think it's a total of 14 new subclasses in this book, which are all nice, but they also introduce brand new systems as well. They introduce a poison system, which is really, really interesting. They introduce augmentation systems, both cybernetic and biological augmentations, and they have specific foci that are geared specifically towards it. They have a poisoner subclass. They have, I can't remember what it's called, but it's effectively an augmented subclass, where the subclass is built around the idea that you get to kind of either biologically or cybernetically modify your body. And so that in and of itself, even if you want to play a G.I. Joe, a lot of the systems in here are very, very useful for Joe characters, because you can create even more interesting characters. Another thing that's nice, they introduce shields in this, like actual, like, I hold my shield up. And just that piece of equipment alone massively changes how you play the game, to the point where they had to create a new weapon trait called, I think it's called overpassing or something like that. It basically allows you to get around a physical shield. So yes, overall, as far as for players, would I recommend this? I have to say, other than the fact that it's really confusing to read. Layout wise, I think this was really poorly laid out. There's certain sections when I do the in-depth review, I'll actually go into details about certain sections that I had to read like half a dozen times before I could finally figure out what they were trying to do in that section. It feels like this book probably would have been better if they had effectively reprinted the core book, or at least most aspects of the core book, but took out all of the G.I. Joe references and just replaced them with the Cobra references, and replace the gear section with the new one, because this book requires you to have the G.I. Joe core book, which is fine. I'm totally fine with that, but it goes so far in not reprinting material that it feels like you're missing part of the book. And so that's my only real negative aspect of this book. And because of that, for players specifically, the actual book itself, I believe it's $60, I want to say. Let me go to Renegade real quick. And before I say the wrong thing, I'm actually going to I'm actually going to find the price of this. So I remember correctly, it's either $60 or $55, and I can never remember. Here we go. All right, Cobra. There we go. Oh, it's actually cheaper than I thought. So G.I. Joe role-playing game, Cobra Codex is $50 even. And it actually releases, when I'm recording this, which is on the 4th, it releases tomorrow on the 5th. This may not get up to YouTube until the 5th, but yeah, so the actual book itself is $50. The PDF is only $35, so you save about $50 on the PDF. And again, because it's so confusing to read, I don't have the physical book yet because, again, it's not out yet. They generally tend to release the PDFs before the hardcover books anyways, and I always buy the hardcover because you get a PDF for free when you pre-order. And Normally, for a little bit after the book goes out. I don't know if they're still going to be doing that with this book. I don't want to speak and then be wrong about it. Officially here, it says for a limited time, pre-orders will come with a PDF copy. And by the time you guys see this, you probably won't be able to pre-order it anymore. So I don't want to say you'll get it for free. But, so my recommendation for players, now that we've beat around the bush about this, my recommendation for players, I think this is worth the $35 of the PDF. I have a hard time recommending the hardcover to players, mostly because it's so confusing to read that the digital copy is simply easier to jump between pages. And you really need to do that in order to be able to understand the book. So normally, if it wasn't for the fact that the book itself is so difficult to read, I would say, yeah, get the hardcover because there's a lot of good stuff in here. But I would have a hard time, like, as soon as I get my hardcover version, I will look through it and see if it feels as difficult to read as the PDF here is. But I doubt that it's going to be any different. And yeah, so my recommendation to players, get the PDF. Or if you can find the hardcover, like on Amazon or something like that, or even through your friendly local game store, and they're able to give you a discount or something. Because I know a few, the game stores that I used to go to had like subscription programs where you would pay like a monthly fee or a yearly fee or something, and then you'd get a percentage off of D&D books or something like that. That was one of the programs I had. So if your friendly local game store does that and you can get this for a little bit cheaper, go for it. But me personally, I can't really recommend spending $50 on something that's so obtuse. So yeah, moving on. The second group. Should GMs buy this? As I mentioned before, this is about running an evil campaign. And playing evil characters is difficult for players. A lot of players will sit there and is like, well, I'm an evil character, so I do bad things. And then they'll do things like they'll go into a town and just start murdering people, which is not what quote-unquote evil characters would do. It's a remarkably stupid thing to go into a city and just start murdering people, because you piss off the city and then get the entire city guard on your ass. It's a dumb idea. But for people that don't understand how villains work, they'll go, oh, I'm a bad person, so I do bad things. No, bad people are significantly more likely to lie and cheat and steal when they're not going to get caught than they are to go out and use brazen violence and things like that in a situation where they don't have control. Violence as a control structure only works when there's nobody stronger than you are. So that being said, for GMs, again, this actually gives a really good look into kind of the psychology of an evil character, and more specifically, how evil organizations control evil characters. And they're blatant about it in here. They talk about, Cobra specifically targets people at their most vulnerable, and they will lie to them and they will manipulate ideas and facts around them so that they only see something in the way that Cobra wants them to see. And they use a lot of truth to do it. One of the groups in here is full of like white collar criminals and things like that, and it's all about kind of money, because there's tons of different subdivisions of Cobra and things that are allied to Cobra but are not actually Cobra, but the general population just calls them all Cobra. It's confusing, but that's the comic. And so one of the kind of subdivisions is entirely kind of white collar criminals and all about the corruption of money and stuff like that. And those kind of characters, it's very easy to use a situation where you can show government corruption and go, well, obviously that means you can't trust the government. Like, something that was extremely common until relatively recently was the idea that you don't trust big pharma. Because they've been shown to and they've been taken to court over and over and over. And something that we see constantly, even now, is the idea that you don't trust big business. And so it's very, very easy to use real, truthful examples of companies exploiting their workforce, or pharmaceutical companies that falsified data or ignored warning signs, or even hid specific things so that they could sell. So they could sell things in the market. These are real things that happen, and they become court cases, and they become big deals. And so it's very, very easy to use those true facts and twist it to the point, well, that means anybody that has money is automatically evil, and therefore you should join us because we don't have much money. And that's not true, but they can make it look that way. And it's an extremely common tactic for manipulative and abusive organizations to get membership. And this is true about every single kind of field of organization, religions, multi-level marketing, bad businesses just in general, cults, all these different things. When they're run by hyper-manipulative and very self-motivated people that don't have a problem using other people for their own gain, this is how they do it. So in that aspect, this is actually a really good book for stuff like that. There's an entire chapter 4, Cobra campaigns, where it goes into kind of the nitty-gritty of how do you run a campaign where you're the bad guys without the players eventually having that conversation. Wait, are we the baddies? And that is a really fine line to tread, because again, a realistic villain is a hero in their mind. They're a villain to everyone else, but in their mind, in their story, they're the good guy. And running a evil aligned campaign, you have to really be good at manipulating things so that the characters, maybe not the players themselves, but so that the characters can justify their actions of, I'm still the good guy because these people are significantly worse than me, or these people deserved it, or I deserve this because of how wronged I have been. It's a extremely common motivation for a lot of just bad people in general. Is the idea that the world is unfair and I deserve something and no one's going to give it to me, so I'm going to take it by whatever means necessary. So the chapter on Cobra campaigns is actually really, really interesting. The other thing, and it has an entire section, like 2 or 3 pages just on this subject, where they talk about the idea that just because you're playing the bad guy doesn't mean you all, like, the organization has to be racist or sexist or some sort of phobia. And that's a really, really important thing to kind of bring up is in any RPG setting, a lot of times people play them to get away from the world, and putting real world references, despite the fact that they are real. Racism really does exist. So do the various phobias, which I hate that term because they're not phobias. Phobia is a scientific and medical term. I have a phobia. I have agoraphobia, and homophobia is not a phobia. It's not. It has nothing to do with that. It's just bigotry. It's what it is. It's stupid. It's dumb. But it's not a phobia. It's never been a phobia. It'll never be a phobia. Phobias massively massively affect your life to the point where you are not allowed to live a normal life because of irrational fears of things. And that's just not what any of these, transphobia, homophobia, they're not. They're bigotry is what they are. That being said, they're real and they exist. And a lot of the quote unquote bad people that we see do prescribe to a lot of bigoted viewpoints. It's a very, very easy way to... Bigotry is a remarkably simple way to control people. And that's one of the reasons why it still exists, is because it's really, really effective in controlling people. And that's why a lot of evil organizations will use some form of bigotry, whether it's race-related, whether it's identity-related, whether it's just class-related. Class class systems and things like that have been used to control people and have been used to create aspects of bigotry for thousands of years. Caste systems in general, extremely effective in doing that, and promising someone that they can break out of the caste system that they've been forced into is an extremely effective method of control. So all of that being said, just because they do exist in the real world does not mean that your players want to deal with those things, especially when they are the bad guys. In a lot of my RPGs that I run, I don't have a problem having racist Kika characters or bigoted Kika characters when they are the bad guys, because those are real things, and having the players triumph over those ideals feels really, really good. But it is extremely, extremely difficult to introduce villains like that without creating caricatures, without running into stereotyping and other things like that are not going to be helpful. And because you are still reliant on the roll of the dice, there are situations where the bigots can win. And that's never something that the players want to deal with, because the bigots win a lot in the real world. We don't like it, but it's true. And so doing that takes a very, very careful hand. And that's basically what that section of Chapter 4 talks about, is the idea that, hey, yes, you can put these things in, but because you're the bad guys, maybe don't. You know, maybe we don't use racism as one of the major motivating factors for Cobra, despite the fact that the original incarnation of Cobra was kind of racist. That was way back in the 80s. It's the 2020s now. Lots of things have changed. Maybe we don't need to make that a fundamental force of your evil campaign when the players are going to have to be a part of that campaign. Let them be other kinds of evil. Let them be hyper manipulative. Let them be the ends justify the means kind of evil. Or let your player characters be the ones being manipulated. And they don't realize just how bad their side is. But maybe leave that stuff out unless you talk to your entire table and they're okay with being a party to bigotry and isms and other things like that. So yeah, as far as do I recommend this for GMs, there's a lot here. Like I said, the Cobra campaigns I think is really, really useful for GMs. It's not too bad for players as well, but it is really geared towards GMs. And then they do have a bunch of new equipment and vehicles, which is great for GMs. They have a bunch of, again, they have all the different augments and stuff like that, which is really, really great. And they do have an entire threats and rivals chapter, which is great, because not only does it give you kind of multiple level of generic Joes that you can use in your G.I. Joe campaigns if you want, or literally any other Essence 20 book, but it also gives generic Cobra stat blocks as threats, because Cobra fights amongst itself all the time. And I really like the idea that they give, and the generic versions of the Cobra stuff are really weird stuff. Like they have kind of cybernetically augmented Cobras that are in there, and biologically augmented Cobras that are in there that create really interesting combat encounters and stuff like that. So yeah, overall, I even, so my recommendation for GMs, I think even the $50 hardcover is worth it for GMs specifically, because there is a lot more here that you're going to be able to use. And the confusing aspects of the book are mostly in character creation. Once you get past character creation, the book is a lot easier to read, and therefore GMs are not going to be stumbling nearly as much over the just bad layout design of the early parts of the book as everyone else. So for GMs, this is recommended. Buy the hardcover or the PDF, whichever one you like better. Yeah. Moving on. The third group. Lorehounds. Should Lorehounds buy this? Essence 20, just Renegade in general, and the people that are working on the Essence 20 system, do a really good job of every mechanical aspect of the games that they write has a lore reason behind it. And that's not true about every single game. Sometimes they will just put mechanics in there because, well, we need the mechanics. A good example is the idea of opportunity attacks in Dungeons and Dragons, which have changed throughout the years. I think my least favorite version of opportunity attacks, probably because it's my least favorite version of D&D, in D&D 3rd edition and 3.5, you got opportunity attacks for literally everything. Cast a spell in melee, opportunity attack. Stand up from prone, opportunity attack. Move at all when you are next to a character, opportunity attack. Everything was an opportunity attack. And an opportunity attack is a mechanical thing. They never really explain lore-wise why opportunity attacks happen, other than kind of a generic, well, you're kind of distracted, so they get a strike for you. Some kind of justification for it. But it's never really explained why, especially at low levels, it takes your entire action to make an attack. But then the other guy simply starts casting a spell, and you instantly can make another attack so fast that it doesn't take any of your action economy. It takes this completely separate action economy called a reaction. Which in other versions of D&D was even more different. And I think in 3.5 you could actually get a bunch of feats that would give you multiple opportunity attacks and multiple things you can do when it wasn't your turn. And it's never explained in the lore why this thing exists. The reason opportunity attacks exist has nothing to do with how actual combat works or with fantasy tropes or anything like that. It is entirely a mechanical thing in the game to actually make melee combat a viable option. Without opportunity attacks and any kind of ranged character would have a massive benefit and would have a massive benefit over any melee-based character, because they can attack from any range, and melee characters can only attack when they're right next to you. And so without having some sort of penalty for ranged characters, which is opportunity attacks and, like in 5th edition, disadvantage when making ranged attacks when characters are within 5 feet and other things like that, it's an entirely mechanical aspect. Without it, everybody would choose ranged characters. You'd never see melee-based characters. That's why in more range-based games, like to give an example, I've been playing a lot of Armored Core 6. Melee weapons are useful in very, very specific builds, but the vast majority of players are using ranged builds because it's a game about giant robots with guns. And swords are always going to have problems dealing with guns, to the point where all of the melee-based weapons have a feature built into them where you swing the weapon and the rockets strapped to your back will activate and shoot you forward to the enemy you're attacking. And one of them, I think it's called the laser lance, actually has a rocket attached to it. So you get thrust forward, and that's the only way melee weapons work. So anyway, the reason I said that, the Essence 20 people are really, really good about giving a lore-based justification for almost everything in the game. And that tradition follows into this book. Every time they present some mechanical aspect, there is lore attached to it. It's one of the things that gets them in trouble a little bit in this book, because due to typesettings and layout, it's hard to differentiate the lore from the mechanics, and that makes things very, very difficult if you're trying to build a character. So you're like, well, wait a minute, where's the part that says exactly what I'm supposed to do? Because I've got a page and a half of text about this one ability, and I can't figure out where the actual thing is that tells me what the ability does. It just talks about, well, this person uses it this way, and in history it's always been considered this. I don't really care about that right now. I'm in the middle of the fight, and I need to know how to use this ability. So that being said, there is just a crap ton of lore in this book. It starts off, chapter 1, The World of Cobra, is all lore. Going into Cobra characters, yes, there's a lot of mechanics here on how to run a Cobra character, but they introduced most of the mechanics for the SS20 system in the other book, and they don't reprint them here. So a lot of those mechanics are mixed in with just a crap ton of lore. And the lore is just kind of dripping from this. And again, I've mentioned this before, this book does give a really good insight into evil characters in general. Again, it's extremely common for regular everyday people to not understand how villainous minds work. And they miscategorize actions and motivations because they're like, well, they're a bad person, so they do bad things. No, they're not. They have a very specific motivation in mind. And if you don't understand their motivation, you're never going to be able to understand the actions that they take, and you're definitely never going to be able to stop them. Because if you don't understand why they're doing it, you can't stop them from doing something if you don't know what they're going to do. You can only react to what they do after they do it. So the whole book in and of itself, really, really interesting and fun for Lorehounds and stuff like that. Again, can I justify the $50 for the hardcover? I tend to think Lorehounds get a little bit more out of physical books than most other groups, simply because their entire interaction with the system is going to be when they're reading it. Whereas both GMs and players, your interaction with the system is going to be while you're playing it. So you will read the books. When you're actually playing, you're not generally reading the books at that point. You're playing the game. So again, because of some of the layout aspects in here, I have a little bit of a hard time recommending the hardcover, just in general, because it's a mess to read. And for Lorehounds, it's probably going to be even more of a headache to read, because you're trying to figure out the lore, and they keep inserting weird places. They keep inserting mechanics and stuff. It's not quite like a White Wolf storyteller system, where it's a novel that they just happen to have some game mechanics thrust in there somewhere, but it's getting close to that. So I would probably say for Lorehounds that are interested in G.I. Joe, I would probably stick with the PDF, despite the fact that, again, I know a lot of people like having physical books to read, and being able to read in bed with a physical book is very, very nice, or read in your comfy chair. Get an e-reader for this and buy it. By the PDF. The hardcover, again, you're probably going to have to flip between pages and stuff like that to be able to understand what they're saying, and go between chapters at certain points, because it's very self-referential. So yeah. So for Lorehounds, do I recommend it? Yes, but I'd probably recommend the PDF over the hardcover, just because I have a hard time recommending someone spend $50 on something that's going to give them a headache when they read it. So, moving on. So, final recommendations for this. Players, yes, but probably just the PDF. The book is really confusing, and the PDF is easier to turn through. For GMs, I recommend the hardcover if you're going to get it, because it's really kind of the first kind of third, the character creation section of the book. That's really difficult to read, and GMs are going to be using the campaign section and the threats and rivals and the equipment significantly more than those first sections. So I do recommend the hardcover for that. And then for Lorehounds, the PDF. I have a hard time recommending $50 for a game that's going to give, or a book that's going to give you a headache when you're reading it. So, for those of you that just came here to get a recommendation on whether or not you wanted to pick up the book, thank you for watching. Again, like, subscribe, turn notifications on in the comments down below. What is your favorite Cobra character? Do you have a specific Cobra character, or do you just kind of like Cobra in general? You like playing the bad guys? Let me know in the comments down below. So, now that we've done that, it's time for us to get to the in-depth review. As a reminder, when I say in-depth, I mean in-depth. I'm going to go through the things that I like, the things that I don't like, the things I think they did well, the things I think they need to fix. And I'm going to be going chapter by chapter, sometimes page by page. I will be putting chapter or timestamps in the description, so you can jump between them and watch this in more than one settings. I know YouTube would prefer that you just watch this entire 2-hour video all at once. I know that's not possible for a lot of people, so please use the timestamps. But that being said, let's jump into this. Chapter 1. Well, I guess we should start with Cobra Wants You. Let's start. Cobra Wants You. We'll do chapter 1 in a second. Cobra Wants You is just one page, but it has a really great introduction. And I'm going to read the box text on the introduction, because half of this page is what does this book do, but the top is just so good, and I think it primes you for the rest of the book. So this is what it says. They lied to you. Your country lied to you. They said if you put in the hard work, you'd be rewarded with a comfortable, happy life. The truth is that your country lets the people who can afford to be the laziest live the most comfortably. They told you that money doesn't buy happiness because they needed you to think you could be happy without it. Your company lied to you. They said you were part of the family, but they treated you like a child. You weren't the equal. You didn't sit at the grown-ups table. If you crossed mom and dad, you got punished. Commercials lied to you. They told you their product would make you healthier, happier, prettier, better in some way. They said you weren't good enough, that without them you'd never be good enough. All lies. Cobra won't lie to you. We need you. Even if you were abused by a system that didn't care about you. Even if you were deemed underqualified for the job you wanted, or overqualified. Even if you didn't fit in. We need your skills. We need your loyalty. We will use you. It's true. Use you to create a better world. A world where everyone can be happy, where everyone can belong, where everyone is good enough. Join Cobra today. We need you just the way you are. Is that not the greatest elevator pitch for an evil organization ever? It's phenomenal. And I think that's what this book does better than any other kind of campaign setting source book I have ever seen. This is a book about playing the bad guys, and it makes you root for the bad guys. And then later on in the book, it tells you why all of this was a lie. So you can understand that the bad guys were never the good guys, but boy, are they good at making you think that. It's brilliant! I love that introduction. And then when we actually get into chapter 1, the first thing we have is a classified document written by Agent Scarlick to General Hawk talking about Cobra intelligence. And it's really well written. It's an in-universe thing that kind of describes what Cobra is doing and why this book is coming up. You know, they basically say Cobra is upping their recruitment, which is why we have new Cobra people showing up, which is a brilliant way to to pitch a new source book. It's like, by the way, the reason why we didn't see a lot of these people before and we are now is because of this in-universe justification for it. It's brilliant. And then it goes into an evil organization where they effectively talk about all the different sub-organizations within Cobra. You have Cobra High Command, Infantry Division, Sci-Tech Division, Weapons Specialist Division, Environmentalist Specialist Division, Pilot Division, Crimson Guard characters, Dreadnought characters, Iron Grenadier characters. I've never been able to say that word. It's grenade with ear at the end, and it means literally a character that uses grenades, or someone that specializes in using grenades. But basically, it talks about all the different little subgroups that are all kind of considered Cobra, but they all have their own little motivations and stuff like that. Each one has notable characters, like the Iron Grenadier characters are led by Destro. Destro's a weapon manufacturer. He was played by, what's the dude's name? I can't remember his name. In the really bad G.I. Joe movie that came out in like 2007, I want to say. Somewhere around there. It had a sequel that was a little bit better that had The Rock in it. But the first one it wasn't great. But anyway, he was in that one. He's played by the Ninth Doctor that I can remember. Christopher Eccleston, there's his name. He's a brilliant, brilliant Scottish actor. And he plays a great version of Destro. So it lists a bunch of famous Grenadier characters, so people from that faction. And then it also has a notable Iron Grenadier troops, where these are basically kind of the rank and file. One of your PCs might be one of these kinds of characters. And they also give you a nice little description of each little subgroup. It's really, really nice things. And then they have little box text in there every so often, like playing a Mars or Iron Grenadier PC. Mars is Destro's weapons manufacturing company. Iron Grenadier is the actual kind of, that's his little personal army, effectively. Yeah, it's a really good chapter that just has everything that you would want to know lore-wise about creating a Cobra character, and gives you lots of inspiration for the different characters that they don't give you a ton. Like, good example, Shadow Strike is a red ninja. And all you get for Shadow Strike in this is, when Cobra Commander attempted to create a replacement for Storm Shadow, he found the perfect candidate in Arishikage training and secretly orchestrated his joining of the ancient clan. Shadow Strike used the techniques he learned to betray the clan and rejoin Cobra. That's all you get about Shadow Strike. So it's not like you're getting a ton to go off of for these characters, but it gives you enough to give you kind of an idea of background and, okay, so that's how that character came to be a part of Cobra. Maybe my character could do something similar. So yeah, overall, Chapter 1 is kind of a knocks it out of the park. It does start to show the problem that I have with the layout, which is they use only one font throughout the entire book, which is not an uncommon thing. Something that a lot of people don't know is, if you are physically publishing a book, you actually have to have the rights to the font in order to publish it, because fonts are copywritten. So either you go through a publisher who owns a bunch of fonts and they just choose the font that they want to use, or you literally have to create your own font, or pay some sort of licensing fee to use a font. So it's not uncommon to use only one font in a book, because every additional font costs money in some way, shape, or form. However, because they use the same font throughout the entire thing, and there are only 3 different colors that they use for that font, you have black, blue, and red. And the borders around everything is red, and so the red text kind of blends with that. And the color blue that they use, it may just be my screen, because I have a blue light filter on it, because staring at blue light for too long messes up your eyes really, really bad, and I spend a lot of time on the computer. But all the colors seem kind of similar, and the only difference between certain aspects and certain organizations on the page are they might change the color or they might underline it. And because of that, it's very difficult to be able to tell when you're looking at one section where one section ends and another section begins. They don't have large page breaks or anything like that between sections a lot of times. They just kind of run on page after page. To give an example, let me see if I can find it in one of my books here. We've got, okay, Avatar Legends. If we look at this, so this is a section where we're dealing with a bunch of moves and stuff like that. And if you look closely, you have, it helps if I go over here. You have this blue font and everything, but then when we get to an actual ability, you see they have an actual page break that's very easy to see, and they use the same font here, but then they have this other thing underneath it, and because the page breaks, it's very, very easy to tell where this ends and where the next thing begins. And that's how they separate everything, is these very, very noticeable page breaks. They don't have that in this book, and they don't generally do that in the Essence 20 books just at all. But they haven't really needed it up until now, because there was enough kind of organization. But because of the fact that Cobra, because of the kind of subdivisions and everything, when you build a Cobra character, you have a lot more choices you have to make. Like you have to pick your influence and your origin and your role, and then your focus. But then you also have to pick which part of Cobra, which kind of subdivision of Cobra that you belong to, because that's going to change some of your perks. And they have to have you actually replace some of the perks from the original roles. Like, it's not just they give you a subclass, they also modify the original class, they modify the original role. And because of that, there's so many different things, but they're all labeled using the same font, using the same colors. And so it's really, really hard to figure out, okay, is this part of the subclass? Is this part of the role? Is this part of the lore? And this is where it first starts. You have an evil organization, then you have Cobra Corps, which is in black and it's underlined, and then you have Cobra High Command, which is the first subdivision, which is in red, but then right underneath it you have notable high command characters, which is in blue and underlined. It looks really similar to Cobra Corps, except it's blue, but the blue is very close to black. And then if you go underneath that, the text directly underneath it is just black with no underline, but it's actually larger than the text above it, which is another thing that's really, really common in books in general, is as you go from large subjects to small subjects, the font size just gets smaller, so you understand. So having a subdivision, the notable high command characters, be smaller than the text below it is really jarring, because now you can't tell is notable high command characters connected to Cobra High Command, or is it connected to Cobra Commander? I don't understand this. And this goes on over and over and over again. I don't actually think they're different text sizes, but the notable high command characters is written in italics, whereas Cobra Commander is written in bold. And so because of that, it just looks bigger than the one above it. It makes it very, very difficult. What I would probably do for this is just increase the font size by like 1 or 2 for everything higher up, so that we have a very easy to follow thing. I don't think titles and subtitles should have the same size text. It makes it very, very difficult and confusing to read, and it just gets worse as we go further in. But that's really the only problem I have with chapter 1, is it starts getting confusing. Chapter 2 gets a lot worse. So, moving on. Chapter 2. Cobra characters. This looks almost identical to the character creation section in every single Essence 20 RPG we've covered. Starts out with step 0, discuss with your GM and other players. 1, character concept. 2, set starting essence scores. 3, select influences. 4, select an origin. 5, select a role. 6, describe your character. 7, form your squad. It's the exact same thing that we see over and over and over again in every single Essence 20 game, and I've just finished doing my G.I. Joe character building on designing new dragons. So this is very, very familiar to me. The artwork here is badass. Super, super good artwork, though. Directly after that 2 pages, you go into the influences, and the influence section also talks about the idea that these are characters that are not just bad guys that do bad things. They have motivations and they have reasons why they were targeted by Cobra, and some of them fully accept and devote themselves to the true ideals of Cobra, of just, ends justify the means and power above everything, and people below you are tools and expendable. All of those things are intrinsic to Cobra, but they don't tell everybody that. And so I like the influences section where it does kind of mention that these influences are meant to kind of explain how a good person could do bad things. And again, there are really good influences. Like the first one they have in here is angry. I have dealt with anger control issues. It's one of the reasons I got into martial arts. I used to have a very short temper, when I was younger. And when I started taking martial arts, I developed significantly more self-control. Um, and it has been useful for the rest of my life. I cannot tell you how useful the ability to control your emotions and take a step back when you realize that you are too heated or you are too emotional at the time to make a rational decision. That is probably the most valuable thing you can learn in the entirety of your life. And martial arts taught it to me. I'm not saying it'll do it for everybody. I had a phenomenal instructor and was surrounded by really good people that taught me the right things. But yeah, so the idea of a character, like I'm just going to read the description here because it's such a great example of subverting the trope that people think. You know, people think of, I'm always angry and I'm going to punch things and I like to be angry. And that's not what it is. Listen to this. Whether due to environmental, chemical, or experiential factors, something makes you quick to anger or angry all the time. Your temper costs you relationships and opportunities. Others are nervous around you for fear they may upset you, regardless of whether your outbursts harm anyone. Even when you find a channel for your anger, it never fully goes away. This is a perfect example of someone that has some sort of emotional disorder. And that's a real thing that tons of people have to deal with every single day. And some people are like me and they find ways to deal with that in a constructive way and a positive way. And some people don't. And it doesn't mean that they're evil, disgusting people. It means that they never learned, whether they chose not to learn, whether they were never given the opportunity to learn. There's a lot of different things, but the end result is they never learned how to channel that excess anger into a positive force. And it allows them to be controlled by it. And that is such an interesting influence for a villainous character. And they go through, and not all of them are going to be so kind of psychologically based. Like the next one is called a chemist. So basically chemicals get screwed up and you get screwed up. Or disenfranchised is another one that I really, really enjoy because, again, I have seen this. And I've worked for charities and the things like that, and I have seen people that have become disenfranchised for one reason or another. It could be a bad boss. It could just be a bad situation that the charity wasn't able to help with, something like that. Disenfranchisement is such a strong motivator. And so I love the fact that, like, again, I'm not going to read every single one of these, but this is such a great look into the idea of a character that will start doing, you know, more self-motivated to the things and more evil-aligned to things. So this is disenfranchised. The world you thought you knew proved you wrong by doing you wrong. Hard work, pulling yourself up by the bootstraps, making sacrifices, none of it paid off the way they said it would. Now you're tired of being the one making all the sacrifices. This is such an extremely common motivator for a lot of people. There was a time in my life that I became extremely disenfranchised because it didn't matter what I did. It always seemed like the deck was stacked against me. Retail does that to you. The number of people that became disenfranchised just in life working in retail is terrifying when you actually think about it. But I mean, those are the influences in this section. They're so good for creating interesting characters. So, and they have other stuff. Mistrustful, scapegoats, another one really good. Spoiled. We're not even going to go into that one, but yeah, the only one I'm not particularly fond of, and it's the one that I won't put into my game, is villainous. And I'll just read you the first line. You like being bad, there's nothing else to it. That doesn't exist. People that actually enjoy inflicting malice on other people is unbelievably rare. And in general, I don't think I have ever heard of a person that their sole motivation was they actively enjoyed hurting other people. A lot of times it's just kind of a side effect of other things, like, it was the only thing that gave them strong emotions, and so that was a way for them to deal with other things. Something that's extremely common just in abuse in general is the idea of a loss of control. When you feel a loss of control, you will try to control other things. And abuse is a really, really effective control tactic, because you can force people to do the things that you want them to do, and that feels controlling. It gives you a sense of control over your own life if you can watch someone else do what you tell them to. So yeah, I'm not a fan of that. And again, I know why it's in there. Because it's just meant to be kind of your generic, well, you're a bad guy. I hate that. And I think it turns into bad player characters, because again, a quote unquote villainous character is going to be the one that walks into a town and just starts randomly killing people because they do bad things, or instead of paying for the goods that they're supposed to be getting, they will just take them, and they derail campaigns because the world has to react to villainous characters. And the reason that people like this don't tend to exist in the real world is they tend to die before they can become anything. Because if someone really just goes around doing bad things because they enjoy doing bad things, they're eventually going to do a bad thing to someone that's significantly more powerful than them, and then they're going to get hurt or die. And in a tabletop RPG, that's going to turn into you're going to derail the campaign and make sure nobody has fun. So like I said, this is the only influence where I will just 100% kibosh it unless I have a long conversation with the player and we come up with a justification for why they like being bad. Is it a chemical imbalance? Is it a genetic disorder? Is it a learned behavior from watching other people? There has to be a motivation other than I do bad things. So yeah, it's the only thing I don't like about that section. Then we get into the origins, and again, the origins themselves. What is so cool about these is, like, first, or the second one is bully. The origin is a bully. And they give an example of the bully, but then they have Cobra character examples. And so for bully, it says, rumors about the Dreadnought powerhouse road pig say that he was expelled from kindergarten for milk money extortion and dishonorably discharged from the scouts. These days, he finds joy in making others feel bad. That's a bully. However, right underneath that is G.I. Joe character examples, because they want you to know that bully, just because this is your origin doesn't mean that you are always going to be a bad character. Part of your Cobra campaign might be your Cobra characters eventually defecting to G.I. Joe, or defecting from both and fighting both Cobra and G.I. Joe. That is the ultimate selfish move, is the idea that I'm not going to help Cobra, I'm not going to help G.I. Joe, I'm going to help myself. So they do kind of explain that just because this is how you started doesn't mean that's how you finish. So G.I. Joe character example for bully. Before joining the Marines, the jungle warfare specialist Gung Ho competed in underground bare-knuckle and knife-fighting tournaments. It was the first step toward legitimizing his first true talent, hurting people. So Gung Ho is technically someone with the bully origin, but he's a good guy. And he's a character that some people like. I'm not as familiar with Gung Ho as some of the other G.I. Joes, but yeah, so, and you see that with every single one of the origins here, is they have a Cobra example, a G.I. Joe example, and then the actual mechanics. And I think all of that is really, really cool and fun. And again, you've got good ones, like you've got Corrupt, you've got your general criminal background. One of the ones I really like, Iconoclast. The description: the world is burning and the system is to blame. Mega corporations started the fire. Politicians argued that the fire's a lie, and anyone who wants to put out the fire can't afford to. Generations of tightening freedom and clawing for more profits have left everyone in the system stuck there. The only way you can see to save the world is to tear the system down. I love this as a motivation for a character. I think it's amazing. And the person they use, the Cobra character that's an example of the Iconoclast, is Destro, who is such an interesting character in and of themselves, because the whole point of Mars, their weapons manufacturer, is they sell weapons to both sides to watch everyone just kill themselves. So they will do what it takes to keep wars going to get rid of the people that they think don't need to exist anymore. And it's a brilliant motivation for a truly evil character of, I'm not going to throw a single punch. I'm going to give you enough guns to blow up the world, and then I'm going to point you at somebody else who has just as many guns because I sold them to them too, and I'm going to watch you guys kill each other. So I never have to lift a finger other than to check the amount in my bank account. Like, that is such an interesting character. So, yeah. So the origins keep going. Another one that's really cool is Silver Medal Syndrome, the guy that's always second place and gets really, really frustrated because he's never first place. Like, that's a great motivation. That resentment, that inferiority complex, all good stuff. And then we get to the role options, and this is where things get really, really confusing. Because the first thing that happens is you have a replacement faction perk. If you've read the crossover guide for G.I. Joe, Power Rangers, Transformers, they talk about the idea of faction perks, and if you want to take something from Transformers to Power Rangers, you replace the faction perk. And so this is building on that idea of Cobra is effectively just a different faction. So in order to fully understand this, you technically need to have read another book, the crossover, because they never talk about faction perks. I think they probably name them in the book, but they don't understand why they're called faction perks or anything, because everybody in G.I. Joe has the G.I. Joe faction perk. And so this is another thing where it's like, okay, I understand that you don't want to reprint stuff that's in another book, but this is already starting to get confusing. And this is where things get really, really messed up. First things first, your Cobra faction perk replaces the Go Joe faction perk. So the Go Joe gives you an extra hit point, and a bunch of other things. For Cobra, instead of getting +1 health, you get a +1 to your evasion score, which I find very interesting. But you also have Cobra Division. So at the end of the role options, or the role options section of Chapter 2, they introduce all the divisions. But they tell you about the divisions up here. And that's something that I really, really don't like. Because if you're building your character, what you're going to have to do is you start replacing your faction perk, and then you have to go through your role, and then you have to come back to figure out which division that you're in, and it gets very, very confusing very, very quickly. I would much rather they either introduce the replace the faction perk at the end, so that Cobra Division, because Cobra Division does kind of rely on you knowing what role you want to take. I would much rather them see replace the faction perk at the end, or put the Cobra Divisions right after this, so that you're not going, oh, you're going to need this, but we're not going to tell you about it until you get through this really confusing part of the book. So, and then we run into my biggest issue with this. And I normally don't show the books themselves, and the reason behind that being I don't want to. I don't want anyone to be able to use my my review of this book to be able to effectively just not buy the book. I would never want to basically replace the product on there. However, in order to explain what I'm talking about, I have to show you guys this. So we're going to very quickly, I think this should be set up. If it's not, get mad at me later. There we go. Yeah, so we can see it. It's not set up super, super well right now. Let me see if I can't. Let's just reset the transformation. I will move this over here, and we'll deal with this later. Okay, so this is the role options, and this is the thing that I want to talk about. I'm going to go over here so you can see. All right, so we have Commando up here, which is fine. This is going to be for the Commandos. Shows you different Cobra examples of Commandos. That's great. Then we have this thing, Viper Branch. It doesn't explain what this means until the equipment section. And it uses the exact same font, the exact same color, and the exact same underline of this Be Ruthless section, which is actually a replacement perk. This is Cobra Commandos gain the following replacement perks in place of the starting commando perks listed in the G.I. Joe role-playing game core book. So this is mechanical. This is something that you actually have to change about the original commando. You have to look in that book, choose the thing that you're supposed to have in there, get rid of that, and replace it with this. But then you have this, which is purely lore, is what it looks like. But later on in the equipment section, you find out that this is actually going to be giving you starting equipment, which is never explained in here. And again, this is smaller than this. It's not. They're actually the same text size, but because this is bolded, it's taller and wider than this, and so it feels really weird for it to be in there. And this whole section here is extremely confusing to read. I kid you not, I read this 6 different times to figure out, okay, so Night Stalkers is a perk? No, it's not. It's just explaining. But here, this is a perk. Sudden Strike is a perk. Night Stalkers is not a perk. It has nothing to do with perks. There's nothing in this that has a mechanical benefit. This is just as covert ops shock troopers, Night Stalkers move into position silently, then make noise with gunfire and explosives. Nothing about this is mechanical, and it's in the middle of a mechanical section, and it's displayed exactly the same as a perk that you need to either be able to look up or put on your character sheet so you can use it. This is really bad layout design. I would significantly prefer if they took this and just turned it into like box text. Put this in its own little box. You can leave it in the same place, but just put a box around it so it's separated so that it looks different. That would make this entire thing massively easier to read. And because of this, and this happens in every single one, I'm not going to go through every one of them, because again, I want you guys to go buy the books. I don't like stealing money for companies, even when they do bad stuff like this. And I wouldn't really call this bad, I would just call this poorly laid out. The layout in this is just, this was a wrong decision. Whoever made this decision needs to make sure that he don't make this decision again, because it was the wrong decision. So going back to here, so I don't feel as bad about going page by page for this now. Yeah, like this entire section is really, really confusing. It's hard to understand because you have to replace perks from the commando, but they don't really reprint the commando at all. You're basically getting half a character class, and different roles have different number of things that they change. Like for the commando, the only thing you change is this Be Ruthless Sudden Strike. However, if you go to which one was it? Here's another one. Yeah, if you look at the officer, they have 3 different perks that they have to replace from the officer role. And so it becomes even more, it becomes even more confusing because, okay, I've gotten into the rhythm of things of the Viper Branch thing is just something I could ignore for right now because it'll come up later, but it's not going to come up now. And then they'll have a replacement perk, and then it'll talk about the new focus options, and I can just go there, and that'll be super easy. No, this one, not only do you have to replace your first level ability, you have to replace multiple first level abilities, and then also replace a 15th level ability. So this whole thing gets very, very confusing to read very, very quickly. And again, I understand what they're doing here is technically a bit confusing because they didn't want to just create a another player's handbook effectively that just had villainous options in it. I think if they had done that, this would have worked significantly better. The way they've done it here, it now requires you to buy 2 different books to use it. And this is a $50 book. The the core book itself is either $55 or $60. So you're doubling the amount of money someone has to pay in order to be able to play a Cobra character. And they're basically telling you that a lot of the stuff in the other book you can't use. This has your own influences. This has your own... excuse me. Hold on a second. Holy crap. Throat just got really dry. Much better. This has its own influences. It has its own origins. It has its own foci. The only thing it doesn't have is its own classes. But even then, a Cobra version of an officer is different than a G.I. Joe version of an officer. So I almost think they should have reprinted the rules for each one of them, because they don't take up much room. Like each one of the roles in the original handbook only takes up maybe 2 or 3 pages. So we're going 7 of them. You're going between 14 and 21 extra pages, which again, in publishing, 21 extra pages is still a lot. That's still a ton more ink, a ton more paper, and it changes the layout of the entire book. It changes how it's printed. I get that. But with how confusing it is to read this, I think that would have been the better option. Again, once you get used to it, it's not horrible, but it makes building a Cobra character a pain in the ass, because you have to have 2 books open simultaneously. You have to flip between multiple pages on those books in order to build a single character. That's not something you ever want in your RPG. It means that, personally, I think it's already going to be a tough sell to get RPG players who tend to enjoy playing the heroes to go, hey, why don't you play the bad guys? And now we're going to force you to pay twice as much in order to play the bad guys and make it twice as confusing in order to do that. That turns this into an extremely hard sell for anyone. And I think even if the book itself sells really well, I sincerely doubt there's going to be many people playing Cobra campaigns, because it's just a lot harder to do everything in it. And this book doesn't help. If they reprinted the roles in here, because again, creating all new roles for Cobras would have been a massive pain in the ass. And I don't think that is a viable option. But just reprinting everything and replacing this stuff, instead of going, by the way, you're going to use this other book, but you're not going to use this aspect of it. We're going to replace it with this aspect. And oh, by the way, we're going to put other stuff in this book that you do have to use, but then you don't have to use it at this point. And then it's just too confusing. And that is my biggest problem with this book, is the layout for the character creation section is just bad. And again, I'm not saying that the book itself is bad. I recommended everyone still buy the book. This is not a book that I say don't get it. But it's really, really upsetting to me just how poorly this is laid out, because I like the idea of playing an evil campaign. It's a great thing to kind of stretch yourself as a dungeon master. To run an evil aligned campaign. It's a great thing to stretch yourself as a player. Again, I played almost exclusively villains until I got out of college. And it wasn't until I got out of college and started going back to community theater that I was allowed to play hero characters again. I was always the bad guy. And it made me a significantly better actor. Because bad guys are harder to play than good guys. They will always be. And creating a character that the audience really hates and really wants to lose is an art form, and it's very difficult to do, and not everyone can do it. So I think this is a wonderful way to expand your kind of toolbox as a role player, and they make it so hard that I don't think anyone is going to want to do it with this book. Perhaps the Decepticon book that comes out is going to be able to do this better. I really hope so. The new, I think the Time Force book that's coming out for Power Rangers is supposed to give you the option to play as the Psycho Rangers. So it's going to kind of give villainous options as well. I hope they do it better in that, because these are just really, really poorly done. And then after the role options, you get to the divisions, which again, They have Air Division, Arctic Division, Cobra Corps, Crimson Guard, Desert Division, Experimental Division, Sci-Tech Division, Sea Division. There's so many different ones. Each one has a different perk. And they all have interesting perks. Like, it's not like they're bad. Like, Jungle Division perk. Minimalist. Navigating the treacherous terrain of a jungle chore takes freedom of motion. Then heavier... that heavy gear doesn't allow. You are qualified in microtech weapons and microtech armor upgrades. And qualified means that you get them without having to roll for them. That's a really big deal. That's a really, really cool thing. But having this show up later, again, I get that you need to know your role first before you can pick your division perk, but I just don't like the layout here. And then after that, they have some new general perks, which make a lot more sense. They're laid out exactly like the general perks and everything else, and a lot of them are very, very cool. And some of the general perks allow for alterations, which is basically a new type of upgrade system that they've created for this. You have both biological and cybernetic alterations, and they're very, very interesting. To give you an example, one of the alterations you can get is Animalize. You take on the aspect of and abilities of an animal. The benefit, gain an animal perk from the pet section on page 165 of the G.I. Joe Role-Playing Core book and page 102 of this source book. When you gain general perks, you can choose animal perks instead. So they have animal companions in the G.I. Joe Role-Playing game. And they have them in the Cobra. They have bad animal in this. So Animalize basically gives you the ability to take a brand new set of perks, which is really interesting. But every alteration comes with a cost. Cost for this, you can only wear battle dress with the limited alteration accommodation upgrade. So anytime you put on battle dress, it has to be upgraded with a very specific upgrade, which costs you a requisition roll. And so because of that, you now have to kind of change how you play your character. And I think that's really, really cool. And there's tons. And the alterations themselves are ranked the same way that upgrades are. You have standard alterations, limited alterations, restricted alterations, and they don't have any, as far as I can see, they don't have any prototype alterations, which is the highest level in everything else. But it's really, really cool and interesting. And the system itself is great. So yeah, brand new system and that is chapter 2. They very easily could have split chapter 2 into a couple more chapters. But they didn't, and because of that, I'm not going to add another timestamp to this. So sorry if this was confusing to follow. It's a long chapter. Moving on. Chapter 3. Equipment in Vehicles. This is another thing that gets a little bit weird. So the first section is talking about equipment, and then you get to equipment packages. The following pre-selected equipment packages are available to any character who meet the requirements. Each package also includes a standard issue equipment every character has access to, fatigues, blah blah. However, you'll need to narrow down the equipment you bring with you on a mission based on load limits as usual, especially if you are also selecting weapons you're qualified to use. Armor, weapon, and upgrade found later in this chapter are marked with an asterisk. Otherwise, everything else is in the core rulebook. So, the Alley Viper branch gets a shield, assault rifle with ammo feeder upgrade, and urban division. So if you are an Alley Viper branch, you get access to this. But if you are in the urban division, you can also get this. The Eeld branch. There are so many different branches, and I believe they are all tied to roles and your division in there. But because that, like Night Viper was in that commando. So Night Vipers, if you're a commando in that, you have access to this, which is ballistic armor with radar tempered camo upgrade and weapon submachine gun with silent upgrade. That's what you get with the Night Viper branch, and it doesn't have an alternate access thing. You have to be a Night Viper to get this particular loadout. And this, in and of itself, I think is just more confusing than it needs to be. I get why they did this, because again, Cobra is hyper compartmentalized and there's so many different aspects of it. So yeah, they basically made it so that each different kind of subgroup gets their own standard layout. But I don't see this as being a useful thing. I think this is complication for the sake of complication. I've mentioned this before, especially when I talk about like 3.5. Complexity for complexity's sake is a bad thing. If you add a new complexity to a system, the only reason you should ever be adding more complexity to something is if it allows you to do something that you are incapable of doing without that level of complexity. Everything that is here can be done without creating this additional branch aspect. You can bundle these into the actual commando roles. Instead of saying, oh, you're from the Night Viper branch and that's going to give you a different thing, you can just put that into there if you want specifically each role to have their own loadout. But it also doesn't change how the game works in any functional way. All the things that you can get through Night Viper branch, you can get without getting that as just assigned to you. You can make requisition rolls for it. It would be just as easy to give players additional requisition rolls if you felt that they needed certain things in order for their class to feel special than it is to create an entirely new system that doesn't add anything you couldn't do without it. So this is one section that I would probably ignore if I was running a Cobra campaign. Just go, you know what, ignore this entire section. We're going to do equipment requisition the way that we normally do it, because it doesn't really matter. This just basically gives you access to weapons that you can already get access to, but here you get them for free. And in normal character creation, you have to roll for them. That is the only difference we have here. And there's so many different ones that it's overly complex and offers no benefit. So, yeah. That being said, once you get past the new branch battle dress nonsense, there's cool stuff. They have new weapon effects and traits. Bypassing is one that's meant to deal with shields. So bypassing weapons get around shields. They have a new effect called Ongoing, which is great. It basically adds damage over time things. And theoretically, the way that Ongoing is described, I have not read through absolutely everything in here. So I don't know if they actually do this or not. But the way that it's described is basically when an attack with an ongoing trait successfully affects its target, it affects them again every round at the end of their turn for the listed amount of time or until treated. So yes, that gives you a damage over time effect. However, with how the Essence 20 system is already set up, that also means literally any effect in the system already can be given an ongoing aspect. So you can have ongoing healing. You can add heal over time. You can literally make an ongoing anything. The only limitation is it says win an attack with the ongoing trait. So technically there needs to be some sort of attack built into it. But that one thing, and this is a perfect example of complexity adding abilities that you couldn't do otherwise. The ongoing effect, or the ongoing trait, changes how the game works. And based on how Essence 20 worked before, there technically isn't a way to apply a damage over time or a heal over time to anything, because there's nothing that technically works that way. There is no saving throws in this, or ends on save, or anything like that. So the ongoing effect, the closest we had was the stun effect, lasts multiple rounds and counts down. But this ongoing trait creates an entirely new way to apply effects to targets. That is necessary complexity. You can't actually do damage over time with how the system is currently set up. There are ways to kind of jury rig it, but you would effectively be creating the ongoing trait. And so by introducing a new trait which adds new complexity, you've created something that you can't do without that trait. And that's what you want. Then the other thing I really like for new weapon effects and traits is the temperamental trait, which is basically if you roll a natural 1 and the skill test fails, you become the target of the weapon effect. So if you have a temperamental rocket launcher and you fumble, you shoot yourself. Again, I'm not a fan of fumble tables in general, but I do like the idea of weapons that are significantly powerful, but the drawback to them is every so often bad things happen. That's effectively how the Wild Mage or the Wild Magic Sorcerer works in 5th edition and has worked in previous editions. Is the Wild Magic table has a lot of really good things that can happen, but there's also a lot of really bad things that can happen on it. And so adding that little bit of chaos makes it an extremely fun class to play. Depending on how close you are when they roll the effect that causes them to drop a fireball at their feet. So I like the temperamental thing. It means that you can create really, really interesting weapons that may just kill the person using them. And I love that. And then they have the poisons and toxins section. Again, adding complexity gives you the ability to do things that you couldn't before. That's a good thing. The whole branch thing is not. And I like the poisons and toxins. I think they're really, really interesting. And they require you... they require you to be trained or qualified in order to use certain ones. Which I think is a really, really great way to kind of limit their use, because 5th edition has poisons as well, and the way that they made it so that not every character uses them constantly is it takes, if I remember correctly, it either takes a bonus action or an action to apply, and it only works once. So you have to waste a significant amount of the action economy in order to use it, and it's just not very useful. If I remember correctly, in 5th edition, it's actually an action to apply a poison, and then in Baldur's Gate 3, they changed it to a bonus action, which makes it slightly more useful. But classes that use a lot of bonus actions will never use poisons. And in 5th edition, I've never seen someone use a poison. In any of the games I've ever played, I've never seen a character use a poison. And that includes in the Adventurers League, which is built for min-maxing and stuff like that. It's never been used. So you do have to find a limiting way to have a system that allows you to add additional effects to your weapon attacks. Like that, you have to have some way to limit it. And I like the training and qualified aspect of this. Because as you get better training in it, you eventually get the ability to be qualified in standard poisons and limited poisons and all poisons, and then eventually you get qualified with all poisons and trained with toxins, so that you can actually requisition toxins if you're really, really good. So all those really cool, interesting stuff. They have an entire page of poisons and toxins. And then they have a bunch of new weapon upgrades as well, which is really, really cool. And then the new battle, they have shields. And I love that they have shields. I think it's awesome. Again, you don't really think of shields when you think of like gunplay and stuff like that you see in G.I. Joe. But I just like the idea of someone coming into battle with a big old shield and then a rocket launcher, or a big old shield and then, a pistol or something. Very kind of Captain America in World War II-esque, where he's got his shield up and then boo, 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 ting, 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 boo, boo. I think that's super cool. And they have a bunch of different versions of shields and then upgrades that you can add to them. Like, the whole thing is just very, very, very cool. Then they have a new pet section, and ways to add alterations to your pet. So if you want a cybernetic pet, or like a genetically modified pet, you can do that. Like, whole thing is cool. And then the final section is just more vehicles, and it's not that the vehicles are bad or anything like that. They're awesome. They're great. They're just more vehicles. So if you like the vehicles in G.I. Joe, you're going to like the vehicles here because there's tons of them. And the pictures of them 100% look like they may be taken directly from toy art, because they have things like the guns are all painted red, which was a really common thing in like the 80s and 90s. Like the weapons would all be like bright red plastic, while the rest of it was like black and blue plastic. And they were always made of a different material and stuff like that. So I just really, really enjoy the fact that these look like the toys I played with when I was a kid. Like really, really close to the toys I played with as a kid. Like a few of these, I'm just like, I'm relatively certain I had that toy as a kid. So I love that. I think it's great. And then they all still have all the stuff that you need to be able to run them as vehicles. And they actually, one of the foci for Cobra characters is actually a vehicle-based character where they actually have a personal vehicle that they carry around with them at all times. Which I thought was really cool, to basically make a mounted character, like a Cavalier style character, that doesn't have to worry about not being able to bring their horse with them, because horses are really, really big. So yeah, that's chapter 3. Moving on. Chapter 4. Cobra campaigns. So this whole section is really a great guide of, okay, first, the first subsection in why Cobra. One of the first questions discussed with the group is why? Why create characters who want to join the Cobra organization? A Cobra campaign flips the ethical script, with players taking on morally gray, if not outright evil characters. In a game that lets you play out your military fantasy, why choose to be bad? And the justification they give is Cobra is cool. Rising through the ranks, G.I. Joe doesn't technically have like a hierarchy. Cobra does. Cobra has a very, very strict hierarchy. And they use rank really, really well. Joes are, with a few rare exceptions, you have commanders, and then you have Joes. And that's really about it. So you're not really being told what to do too often, unless Duke is coming up to you and saying, hey, you need to do this. Or General Hawk is saying, hey, these are your commands. So other than basically the DM or the GM telling you what to do, there are really ranks in there. Cobra, there's tons of ranks. And there is a benefit to that, because simply by being a higher rank, you get to tell your subordinates what to do. There's a control aspect to it. There's a power aspect to it that doesn't exist in G.I. Joe. Having worked in management, this is a really big motivator for a lot of entry-level associates to try to get into management. And something that's really interesting is people that get into management to tell other people what to do generally don't last very long, because it's not how management works. But the ones that do are very, very good at manipulating people. And those are the bad managers that you hear about all the time, are people that are hyper-focused on control and authority, and specifically got into leadership positions in order to exert authority over other people. And you have to be really, really good at your job in order to be able to survive as that. Or not really good at your job. You have to be really, really good at understanding how your job works. You don't actually have to be good at your job. You just have to understand how your job works in order to be able to flex that muscle. But it's an extremely common motivator for people that have never been in power to want to get power so that they can command people underneath them. And that's something that Cobra does a lot of. And then the other two justifications for why Cobra are instigators and hero of your own story, which we've already talked about. And then it talks about probably the more important aspect of this is having fun without crossing lines. This is the most difficult thing for a GM running an Evil Aligned campaign is, again, there are certain things that everybody agrees is evil. Massacres and the disregard of human life is considered evil by everybody. I don't know of a single culture in the entirety of history that has ever accepted that murder and just killing people is not a bad thing. There are some cultures that are willing to accept it for a greater good. But stuff like that, and there's other things that everyone will generally agree: bigotry, the various isms, racism, classism, things like that. Sexism, those are all things that everybody agrees are evil. When you're running an evil campaign, that doesn't automatically turn them into good things. And if you glorify those things, not only does the campaign start to become less fun, because it's not really fun to be a caricature of a villain. They're just not fun. Like Judd, in and of himself, flirts. Judd from Oklahoma. He is the bad guy in Oklahoma. I played him. When I first read the part, and I hadn't looked through, like, he has his own solo called Lonely Room that really defines his character. Without that song, Judd is a caricature that is not fun to play. And I was actually really upset when I got cast in the role because I wanted to play Curly. I wanted to be the good guy. But because I was a base, I was worried that the director was going to cast me as Judd. And so I didn't prepare anything to audition for Judd. I specifically, because back in my high school, I specifically, they ask you what parts you're auditioning for. And generally, you won't get cast outside of a part you're auditioning for, with a few rare exceptions, one of them being me. And so I didn't even say I was auditioning for Judd. When I got cast by it, the guy who has unfortunately passed away, and it was really, really sad when I found out that he passed. But he was this brilliant. He was a choir director who was also an operatic bass. He actually there's an opera in Wisconsin called the Skylight Opera, and it's a professional opera, and he had sung there. His wife was my voice teacher for a number of years. She was a soprano in the opera. She was a lyric soprano. She was amazing, and she taught me so much in my early career with my voice. On how to be a good singer and the proper way to sing. She changed my life, and her husband changed my life. I actually assistant directed under him the next year, so I got to learn what directing is about. They were great. But anyway, I auditioned for Curly. I didn't get Curly. I got Judd, and I was really upset because playing a caricature of a bad guy is really boring and it's not fun, and it doesn't feel good. Bad guys are angry and they're just full of negative emotions, and as an actor you have to feel those emotions so that you can project them out to the audience, and it's not fun. However, the song Lonely Room is Judd is in his shack. He basically lives in a shack. It's a one-room house that he lives in, and the actual lyrics are, "The door creaks, the floor squeaks, there's a raindrop a-dripping from the roof, and I thinks to myself," and it goes on from there. I can't remember all the lyrics because we're talking about like almost 20 years ago that I did this. But the whole song is just him looking around and realizing how much of a shit life he has. And he is constantly comparing himself with Curly, who's the hero of the story. Because both Curly and Judd are interested in the same girl. And the girl that I can't remember her name for the life of me right now, is just a genuinely good person. And everybody in the town treats Judd like shit. He is refuse. He is disgusting. Everyone treats him like he's nothing. Except Lori, that's her name. Except Lori treats him like an actual human being. She doesn't flirt with him or anything like that. She genuinely just treats him like an actual human being for one part of the show. And she's also drop dead gorgeous, and is eligible at the point. She's not. She's actively kind of like people are actively pursuing her for romantic relationships. And Judd has never had the idea that he ever could be with anyone because everybody hates him and everyone treats him like he's disgusting and horrible. And so this song is him just looking around going, I can't believe I was treating me the way that everyone else was treating me. The floor creaks, the door squeaks. There's a raindrop dripping from the roof. No one should live like this. And I have let myself live like this because I have believed everybody else that I don't deserve anything better. And I'm not going to do that anymore. And he's a bad character. I'm not saying that somehow that justifies him trying to kill Curly or trying to basically force Lori into a relationship with him. All of those things are bad. But he didn't do them because I'm a bad person. I do the bad things. He did them because he saw an injustice and he made the wrong choice because of it. He got this chip on his shoulder going, no, I deserve to be treated better. And if other people aren't going to treat me better, I'm going to treat me better. And I'm going to treat everyone else the same way they treated me. And I'm going to take the things that I want because I deserve them. That is the wrong mindset. But it is significantly more interesting to play as an actor, and it is much easier to hate that character as an audience member than it is, oh, I come in and I does the bad things because the bad things is what I does. That's a dumb character. So the same thing is true about running an evil campaign. You have to give them actual justifications for why they're doing bad things. Can't be, ooh, I'm the bad character that does the bad things. You have to make sure that if they are doing the bad things, that there's a justification behind them. And there are certain the bad things that are simply not justifiable. And a lot of bigotry, it's not really justifiable. It really ain't. You can write a really, really intelligent and incredibly creative character, but you can't really justify bigotry. You just can't. And they have to be wrong. That is the only way to create a believable villain that immerses themselves in some sort of bigotries. You have to show them as just being flat out wrong, making a wrong choice somewhere, connecting a dot that shouldn't have been connected. It has to be wrong. So anyway, getting back to real world issues and what this thing is talking about. There's this whole thing talking about real world issues, and then defining Cobra is basically, if you're going to run a Cobra campaign, you don't actually have to do everything that they do in the comics, because the comics have been going on for 40 years, and Cobra has changed massively in 40 years. Because they were a caricature when they first came out. They were just the bad guys that do the bad things. And now they're giving you all these different kind of options. Like, one of the things they do, purpose. Cobra is a ruthless criminal organization determined to rule the world. But why does Cobra want to rule the world in the first place? If they successfully take over the world, then what? So this gives you a bunch of different things like justice. Justice might be a motivation for Cobra. This is not how things should be. Terrible people get holidays named after them because those benefiting from their atrocities convince themselves the ends justify the means. If more wrongs will set things right, Cobra will commit every wrong it takes. So you can create your version of Cobra to be an organization based on the idea that we're getting justice. Again, justice is a good thing. What happens is Cobra makes a wrong decision about how to go about getting justice, or decides the wrong people are undeserving of what they have, and so they need to take from people that don't deserve to have their things taken from them. That's how you create an evil organization. You take good things and you pervert them in some way. So yeah, and then they have a reach section, how big is Cobra, and then a tone section, different ways that you can kind of describe Cobra, and then a unity section. Exactly how unified is Cobra? Because that's another thing about evil campaigns, is it's very, especially if your players don't understand how to play an evil character, most evil campaigns will fizzle out because the characters will backstab each other. And it's a remarkably stupid thing to do. But again, if you're, I'm going to do the bad things because I'm does the bad things, I'm the bad thing. You can't run a character like that because they can't work with other people. That's why so many supervillains have subordinates, not allies. They're always backstabbing each other. And so one of the aspects of your version of Cobra can be, well, exactly how unified is Cobra? Are they super good where they're always working together? Are they always kind of fighting against each other and there's politics going on all the time? I really like that. And then they have the role of the PCs. Why are the PCs in here? Are they unwitting accomplices? Do they not realize Cobra's the bad guys? There's a movie called Street Fighter. Came out in the 90s. It was Raul Julia's last movie, and he's brilliant in it. The movie itself is horrible. It is so bad. Jean-Claude Van Damme plays Guile, which is hilarious. And one of the characters, Zangief, is a part of Bison's, Shadaloo, that's Bison's organization. And he is part of Shadaloo because he believes in M. Bison and he believes the propaganda. There's a brilliant line at the end where DJ, who is also a member of Shadaloo, but he's in it because he's getting paid, they've both just escaped the exploding base where Bison has just died, and Zangief is like, "What? How are we going to help the great M. Bison?" He's like, "What are you talking about, man? I'm not going to do anything for him." He's like, "Why? Don't you believe in the code?" He's like, "No, I was getting paid, man. Big money." Using as many racial stereotypes as they possibly could. And then Zangief just turns and goes, "You were getting paid?" And it's a brilliant scene because Zangief 100% was just manipulated, and he believed the propaganda. And he actually changes sides near the end and helps out the other guys, which is really funny. But that is 100%. There are a lot of people that do very bad things because they don't realize that they're the bad guys. You know, they believe the propaganda. They believe what they're doing is right. And that can be a really, really fun story to tell, is people coming to the realization that, oh my God, we're the bad guys. We're doing bad things. And the choices you make after that can make two very different but very interesting campaigns. So the role of PCs, are they unwitting accomplices? Are they willing participants? Are they ambitious usurpers? So, the idea of, are they doing this because they believe it? Are they doing it because they don't realize what they're doing is wrong? Are they doing it because they genuinely believe it? Or are they doing it to betray the people that talk and take over? All three of those really, really fun, interesting, evil-themed campaigns. But they all require the players to understand the difference between, I'm a bad person, I do the bad things, and playing a self-motivated character. Yeah. And then the last part is Cobra locations, which is basically just all these different places, and they have they give you a brief description of all these different locations, and then they give you plot seeds, basically things that your characters might do in there. They have the same thing in the G.I. Joe core book, and they're really great. So this is a really, really great tool for GMs in general, because it gives you plot hooks and stuff like that, give you ideas about how you want to start your campaign as you work with your players more. Something I have found running multiple multi-year campaigns is the best thing to do is start your campaign with some kind of generic side mission style adventures, and let the players learn their characters and start inserting stuff that might come back later to haunt them, and see how the players react to it. And eventually they will direct you to where you want to start creating an actual plot for. Traversing the Veil has recently gotten to the point where I finally kind of know where I want this campaign to go and eventually have an endpoint. And they started at, I think they started at level 5. I think they're at level 9 now. And we're in episode like 47. So we've had 47 sessions of this game. And I am now finally at the point of like, oh, I know what the end game for this campaign is going to be. And I'm right now slowly putting in the seeds of them figuring out what the end game for this campaign was. When I started, I had no idea. I had a bunch of different ideas. Well, do I want it to be this? Do I want them to deal with classism? Do I want them to deal with, government running wild? Do I want this to be Firefly in space? What do I want? Or Firefly not in space, Firefly in fantasy world. What do I want them to do? And so, I think using these plot seeds is a great way to start a campaign. And then as the players, especially if you give them choices, it was one of the things that I gave my players is I would give them a bunch of different, because they were looking for work, I'd give them a bunch of different work opportunities and they'd pick the one that they want. And then as they did that a couple more times, suddenly we know the things that those characters value, and we know the things that those characters want. And now I can create a storyline that they're going to care about, as opposed to just creating a storyline and hoping beyond all hope that you can make them care about it. No, find something they care about and make a storyline about it. So anyway, that's one of the things I like about stuff like this, is just pick out some of these these plot hooks, use them to get them, through like the first 5 or 7 levels, and then you can start kind of gearing this towards, does it look like they're having a problem with kind of the higher ups and might want to depose them? All right, let's turn this into a sabotage campaign. Oh, have they really formed a really bad opinion of the G.I. Joes as just these Boy Scouts that don't understand how the real world works? I guess we're going to try and wipe out the Joes and make Cobra, world order. Those are all really great ways to do it. And I think that is... Yeah, and that's everything for that chapter. So, moving on. Chapter 5. Threats and Rivals. Is exactly what it sounds like. It's just a bunch of new stat blocks, and I like them. Probably my favorite stat block in this. They have a section called Civilian Threats, which is basically, if you're not fighting Joes, these are just not regular Joes. These are regular people. They have one stat block for that called Local Hero. And their attacks are Rock and Throne Rock. I love everything about this. They're threat level 0. So even your level 1 characters are really not going to be challenged by a single local hero. But they have it in there. So, and they do have things like a perk for the local hero. Cobra may mock their foolishness, but the bravery it takes to stand up for what's right inspires others. When there's one or more local heroes in a scene, their allies gain a +2 bonus to willpower. So, simply inserting a local hero can actually benefit the Joes, because they can be inspired. Like one of my favorite scenes from Power Rangers ever, the end of Power Rangers in Space. The Power Rangers have been defeated pretty bad. They're unmorphed right now. And Astronema has been mind controlled, so she actually doesn't know who the Power Rangers are. But she's taken over Earth, and she's up there, and she goes, "Power Rangers, show yourselves, or I'll kill everybody here," because that's what bad guys do. And the Power Rangers are disenfranchised at this point. They're like, "How are we supposed to do this? We fought and we failed." And if we go and we fight again, we're just going to fail again. Why in the hell would we do this? We failed. We're worthless. And while this is going on, and they're trying to figure out what they're supposed to do, because they don't want people to die, but they don't think their sacrifice is going to do anything. Bulk, the bully, or one of the bullies from the first season of Power Rangers, comes out, goes, "I am the Blue Ranger." And then Skull comes out. "Yeah, and I'm the Black Ranger." And another just random woman, "I'm the Pink Ranger." and their professor friend comes out, and I am the Red Ranger. And all of these regular people come out, and the Power Rangers have protected them for years at this point. And they're like, no, we're going to protect the Power Rangers. A very I Am Spartacus moment. And they come forward, and that gives the Rangers enough that, because Astronaut goes, fine, kill them all. And the Rangers go, wait a minute, we're the Rangers. It's morphin' time. Or no, they didn't do it. So it's let's rock it, because that's how they morph now. And it's such a great scene. And just having this stat block of a local hero who just kind of steps forward and like chucks a rock at at the bad guys. Not only is that a really, really cool thing for the villains to have to deal with, because that might be a situation where this one local hero shows up and it's enough for the Joes to rally, and it forces the players to retreat. That creates an interesting story. Or I'm 100%, I would totally use this character in my G.I. Joe campaign. So that the Joes are in a really bad situation, and this random dude just comes up and chucks a rock and goes, yeah, I don't have really cool, awesome guns and rocket packs and all this stuff, but I'm going to stand up for what's right. And I love that kind of thing. And I love that they've encapsulated that in a single character. I think that's cool. And then they have other stuff too. They have guard dogs and government agents and law enforcement officers. And then they have G.I. Joe threats, where they have the green shirts, which are basically military that are helping out the Joes. So they have different flavors of green shirts. And then they have 3 different levels of Joes. You have the Rawhides, which are the low threat level Joes. And then you have the average Joes, which are your mid-level Joes, and there's multiple flavors of them. And then they have top brass, and they give you stat blocks for Duke, Gung Ho, Lady J, Roadblock, Scarlet, and Snake Eyes. And they also give you a stat block for Timber, which is Snake Eyes' pet. And then they have Cobra threats, where they have things like Alley Vipers and Bio Vipers, which are Vipers are basically your standard Cobras, and Bio Vipers are genetically altered Vipers, and so they have things like scorpion stingers on them and bug eyes and claws and fangs. Like, it's super cool. Everything about it is awesome. And then they have cyber vipers, who are just cyborgs effectively. And then neo vipers are kind of superhero things. And then night creepers are super assassins, and toxo vipers use poison. Toxo zombies are dead ones that came back. And then they have the big villains. They have Big Boa, Cesspool, Crocmaster, Serpentor, and then Tombstone. Then the last section is the contact system. They introduced the contact system in the space expansion for Power Rangers. And I just love the contact system in general. It's basically when you create relationships with famous NPCs, you can actually call on them and get benefits for them using a system that uses stuff called allegiance points and other stuff like that. It's not an incredibly complex system, but it's complex enough to add what is necessary to be able to do something different. And they have so many contacts in here. They have kind of generic Alley Viper or generic things like that, like the Crimson Guard. But they also have characters like the Baroness or Cesspool or Big Boa. Even going up to things like Destro. If you get friendly with Destro, he costs a lot of allegiance points to actually get in there. But there are specific perks you can get to be able to for becoming friends with him, and like there's lots of really cool systems. The whole contact system I think is really good, and they've refined it in here to be great. Yeah, there's really nothing else I can say. Even if you don't want to play Cobra stuff, just the contact system in here is phenomenal. Just rename all the contacts to something else, and you've got a great system here for doing cool stuff. So yeah, it's the end of chapter 5. Moving on. Chapter 6. Live the Cobra Adventure. This is your intro adventure. It's a good one. I really like it. The first part, I believe it's got 3 parts. The first part is called The Constrictor, and it is literally, this is how you play G.I. Joe the RPG. It's a really great introduction that gives you an example of every kind of major system. This is how skill checks works. This is how combat works. All that stuff. It's an intro adventure done really, really well. And they also say, there's a little part that says relieving pressure. Parts 2 and 3 of pressure are tied closely together, whereas part 1 stands apart. If you want to save some time, or you're concerned your players won't appreciate Big Boa sadistically testing their abilities while simultaneously teaching them the skill system, you can skip the Constrictor, have your players build 2nd level characters, and start with part 2. So part 1, you basically learn how to, you learn the system, and you also learn that Big Boa is an asshole. And then as soon as you get through part 1, you level up your characters to level 2. So this is just meant to get you from level 1 to level 2 and teach you how the system works, which is really the only reason to start a level 1 character. Even in D&D 5th edition, I hate running level 1 games unless it's for new players. If it's for new players, level 1 is phenomenal. It's perfect to be able to run. But if I'm playing with people that are that have played before and know the system, I generally prefer to start at level 5. Because that gives them access to a feat, and it also gives them extra attack and 3rd level spells. So if you start at level 4 or level 3, you're very quickly going to get to level 5, and everything changes at level 5. So just starting them there gives them all the stuff that they need. Some people will do level 3 just because that gives you your subclass. But tier 1 to me is entirely for new players. And I tend to prefer starting at level 5. So I like the idea that they're like, okay, level 1 is literally, it's just to teach you how to play the game, and as soon as you know how to play the game, we're gonna give you level 2. And I like that. And then part 2 and 3 is much more of what you're going to do. There's an ambush aspect to it. And there's some combat and other stuff. And then part 3 is the actual like big thing that you have to deal with. And it's a well-written introductory adventure. I like that. I think the Essence 20 people, for the most part, when I have read their pre-written stuff, with a few rare exceptions, check out my in-depth review of Adventures in Angel Grove to listen to me tell them that this was the wrong choice to make. But other than that, they understand adventure building really well. And I have used the things that I learned when I ran my Power Rangers mini campaign last December. I used a lot of the things I learned from reading Adventures in Angel Grove to create my own adventure. So if you say nothing else about the Essence 20 designers, they know how to design a competent adventure. And you can learn a lot from just reading the stuff that they do and kind of copying the setup that they make and the kind of overall form that they use. It works really, really well in Essence 20. But yeah, there's not much more I can say about Chapter 6 other than it's a cool adventure. So, moving on. Now we are at final thoughts. Overall, I would like to like Cobra more than I do. Again, the thing that I tend to get most excited about when I get a new core book is the character options, because I like building characters. It's one of the reasons why designing new dragons is a thing. I really like building characters. It's fun for me. And the character options in this are cool, but they're so poorly presented that it almost ruined it for me. Everything else, the equipment and vehicles, the Cobra campaigns, all the other stuff in here is really cool. I really like it. And the actual options themselves are interesting and fun, but they're so confusing to read that it turned me off. When I first got the book, like I actually got this book, I think maybe 1 or 2 days ago. because I had to wait until the next month because I didn't have money for it. These are really expensive, guys. And hey, anyone from Renegade, if you are watching this, I would love for you guys to like send me books and I do these because I do tell people to buy your books. So I'd be totally cool if you guys wanted to. I would tell people that you gave me the books, but this is really expensive. And so yeah, I'm a big fan. I'd love to work with your guys' marketing team. I have a degree in marketing. I know how marketing works. I'm very good at it. Please give me free stuff. That being said, when I first read this a couple days ago, I just shut the PDF because it was so confusing, and I was going through a panic attack at that point anyways, because of other things going on, and I could not understand anything about the book. It was so confusing to me. It was gibberish. And then when I came back and reread it today, significantly, it took me 6 read-throughs of the character section to get to the point where I understood what they were talking about. And I had to go all the way through equipment and vehicles to get what was going on. And I kept flipping back all the way down to Cobra campaigns. Like I go from chapter 4 to chapter 2 to chapter 1 to chapter 3 to chapter 1 to chapter 2. It was so confusing. If they do just that little change, which I don't think they really can do. I mean, I guess if they did another printing of this, they could, where instead of those division things being printed in the exact same font as the replacement perks, making them into their own kind of box text. I think that would have fixed a lot of my problems with this. So if anyone from Renegade is listening, if you guys could do that, this book would be a solid recommendation for me instead of there's lots of good stuff in here, but you're going to get a headache learning it. And that upsets me because, again, I think the people that make this are really good at what they do. And again, I've had interactions with one of the people that works on the Essence 20 stuff. I don't think I see his name in the credits here, but it's possible that I'm just reading it too fast. Oh, there he is. Yeah. So he's credited as an Essence 20 designer, and he's a really awesome person. And he obviously understands RPGs. So it kind of upsets me that you have and it's obvious through the rest of the book, you have really, really talented designers and writers and editors and everything. And it was literally just one bad choice that has ruined that section of the book for me. And it's a really, really simple fix, but a really, really simple fix in the business world costs tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars to fix, because printing 10,000 copies of a book is expensive. Updating digital files is slightly less expensive, but still costs a lot of money. Like all of this stuff costs a lot of money. And that's why these books cost as much as they do. The reason you don't generally get $20 RPG books is because it costs a lot more than $20 to make the book, much less to design and implement and all that stuff. So I totally get why I'm probably not going to see the update that I want for this particular book, especially since I will guarantee this book does not sell anywhere near as well as the original G.I. Joe book does, because that's how RPG books work. Your core book will always be your best-selling one, and then your next kind of expansion will get less and less and less. The only publisher that has ever not done that is 5th edition, is the only RPG book that has ever sold more of their next copies than the books that they originally sold. Like their core books have actually been outsold by campaign settings and stuff like that. And that's just because 5th edition is an anomaly. But yeah, overall, I like the book. I really do. Chapter 2 is just massively confusing and gives me a headache every time I read it. But without that problem, the book is solid. It's really cool. It goes into an aspect of characters that I don't think gets mentioned enough, which is what makes a good villain and how do you portray a good villain. I don't think they get everything right in that aspect, but it's a lot more right than literally any other guide I've ever seen for RPGs. Again, this is coming from someone that played exclusively villains for half a decade. Like, I played a lot of bad guys, and I got very, very good at it. And I learned to really enjoy playing the bad guys because they are really fun, complicated characters to play. But it takes a special set of skills to do it, and it takes a lot of work to create an interesting bad guy. And this gives you a lot of the stuff that I learned portraying them for years. But it gets a few things wrong, and it doesn't touch on absolutely everything that I would like it to. And that's probably good because, again, it is a very specific skill set to be able to play bad guys, and it's very hard. And I'm not sure you can really teach it in a book. I think there has to be a kinesthetic aspect to portraying a bad guy, whether you have to write them yourselves or actually portray them as an actor or something like that. So, yeah, but overall, I think the book itself is great. It is a great book that is flawed by a really, really bad layout design choice. And that's it. It isn't even all of the layout. It is a single design choice that has really wrecked a large part of the book. It's both fascinating and upsetting at the same time. But I do still recommend pick up the book. Just understand it's going to give you a headache. Or, again, if anyone from Renegade is listening to this, if you guys can implement that change, this book becomes a phenomenal book that I would recommend to everyone, even people that don't play Essence 20. This is a great kind of primer on this is how you build interesting villains. I just can't recommend it to anyone outside the Essence 20 people because it's not going to be fun to read, and you really do need to understand the character creation stuff in order to be able to understand the whole book. You really do. So anyway, that is going to be all for me today. As always, if you enjoyed this, remember to like, subscribe, hit the bell icon, all those super, super important things in the comments down below. Who is your favorite villain in fiction? And feel free to give a why. I personally, I really, really enjoy Claude Frollo from The Hunchback of Notre Dame, specifically because so many people do not understand the character. A lot of people kind of just write him off as, oh, he's a sex pest. And he's not. He is a person that has based their entire life around the idea of piety and has never been tempted before. And he finally meets someone that actually tempts him to do something that he considers a sin, and it breaks his mind. And he goes insane because of it, because he can't figure out, he built his entire life about the idea that I am so pious and I am so much better than everyone else that I'm not able to be tempted. I am untemptable. And then he gets tempted and he falls into temptation. It's not just that he gets tempted, he goes for it. And that totally destroys his own self-image of himself. And that is such an interesting character that everybody else just writes off as, oh, he wants to have sex with the girl. It's not the character at all. He is entirely just a very self-focused, very illusions of grandeur style character that has built himself up to be perfect and then finds out that he's not. That is an incredibly interesting character. Also, his song is insane. But anyway, yeah, let me know, what is your favorite villain in any sort of fiction? Put that in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, that is all for me today. I will see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.